South Korea's shipyards could soon start building warships for the United States Navy, something no foreign shipyard has been allowed to do in the modern era. According to the Korea Jongang Daily, the White House has signaled openness to letting shipyards outside the United States construct vessels for the U.S. Navy, a shift that would upend a rule that has governed American warship construction for generations. The report names South Korea specifically, and for a simple reason: its shipbuilders are, by tonnage and by speed of delivery, among the most productive in the world. This video lays out what has actually been reported, what remains a proposal rather than a done deal, and why South Korea keeps coming up as the leading candidate if the door does open. We'll walk through why the U.S. Navy's own yards have fallen behind, what a company called Hanwha has already been allowed to do with American ships, and what a full policy change would actually require from Congress. Where something is confirmed, we'll say so. Where it's still an open question, we'll say that too. Start with the core of the story. The Korea Jongang Daily reports that the White House has signaled support for allowing foreign shipyards to build vessels for the U.S. Navy. That's a policy shift under discussion, not a signed order and not a finalized contract. The report frames it as a change in posture from Washington that could let South Korean shipbuilders compete for American naval work they've historically been barred from bidding on. It's worth being precise about what signaled is doing in that sentence. It means an intention or a favorable disposition has been communicated, not that a rule has already been rewritten. We'll come back to that, because it matters for how confident anyone should be that this actually happens, and on what timeline. Why would Washington even consider this? The reporting points to a familiar and well-documented problem: the U.S. Navy's own shipyards have struggled with backlogs and delays on submarines and surface combatants. This part isn't new or contested. It's been the subject of congressional hearings, Government Accountability Office reports, and Navy budget testimony for years. Virginia-class attack submarines have slipped their delivery schedules by a year or more in several cases. Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines, the program meant to replace the aging Ohio-class boats that carry a leg of the nuclear triad, have faced their own schedule pressure. Surface combatants, destroyers, and frigates have seen similar delays tied to workforce shortages, supply chain bottlenecks, and aging shipyard infrastructure. That's the obstacle underneath this entire story. American shipyards, even with billions of dollars in Navy contracts, haven't kept pace with the ships the Navy says it needs. What's now being reported isn't just pouring more money into the existing yards. It's asking whether outside capacity from an allied nation could help close the gap. Here's where South Korea enters the picture and why the reporting singles it out rather than, say, Japan or a European yard. South Korea is home to two of the largest shipbuilding conglomerates on Earth, Hanwha Ocean and HD Hyundai Heavy Industries. Between them, these companies operate some of the largest dry docks in the world at facilities in Gyeonggi and Ulsan, and have spent decades building commercial tankers, container ships, and LNG carriers at a scale few other countries can match. South Korea isn't a candidate because of a single announcement. Its yards already build more tonnage per year than the rest of the world's shipbuilding industry combined in some categories, according to industry tracking bodies like Clarkson's Research. I went through the recent record of what Hanwha has actually already been permitted to do with U.S. Navy vessels, because that history is the clearest signal of where this policy conversation has been heading. In 2024, Hanwha Ocean completed maintenance and repair work on the USNS Wally Shira, a U.S. Navy dry cargo ship, at its yard in South Korea. That overhaul required the Navy to invoke a waiver under U.S. law, specifically the framework in Title 10 of the U.S. Code that generally restricts naval vessel maintenance work to American shipyards. It marked one of the first times work on a U.S. Navy ship of that kind was performed at a South Korean facility. That's maintenance and repair, not new construction, an important distinction we'll return to. But it shows the groundwork for foreign yard involvement in Navy work was already being laid before this latest report, so the repair work was done. The waiver was granted. Case closed on that one ship, right? Except it wasn't closed at all. What that single overhaul opened up was a much bigger conversation in Washington. If a South Korean yard could be trusted with a Navy ship's maintenance, why not its construction? That question runs straight into the next major development. The Shipbuilding Cooperation Agreement between the United States and South Korea, often referred to in reporting as MASGA, shorthand for a Make American Shipbuilding Great Again framework. As part of a broader trade and investment understanding between the two countries reached in 2025, South Korea committed to a substantial investment in American shipbuilding, reported at roughly $150 billion over the life of the agreement, aimed at modernizing U.S. shipyards, training American shipyard workers, and expanding capacity, with South Korean firms playing a direct role. Hanwha had already acquired the Philly shipyard in Philadelphia in late 2024, giving it a foothold in American commercial and, potentially, naval-adjacent shipbuilding. HD Hyundai, separately, has pursued its own cooperation discussions with U.S. shipbuilders and officials about how Korean expertise and capacity might plug into American naval production. Here's the complication that changes how this story should be read. None of what we've just described, the Amazga investment framework, the Philly shipyard purchase, the Wally Shura repair, actually lets a Korean yard build a new construction U.S. Navy warship on Korean soil. That's a different and legally much bigger threshold. Existing U.S. law has long required that naval vessels be constructed in the United States, tied to national security, industrial base, and even Jones Act-adjacent protections for the American maritime sector. What the Korea Jongang Daily is reporting, the White House signaling openness to foreign-built Navy ships, would mean moving past investment and repair work into something that, as far as public reporting shows, hasn't happened in the modern era, an actual U.S. Navy combatant or support vessel built from the keel up in a foreign shipyard, even an allied one. That's the open question this video can't resolve for you, because it hasn't been resolved in Washington either. A shift in White House posture isn't the same as a change in federal statute. Any move to allow foreign construction of Navy ships, as opposed to repair, maintenance, or component supply, would likely require action from Congress, not just an executive signal. There has been legislative activity here. A bill introduced in the Senate in 2025, the Ships for America Act, was built around expanding America's commercial and naval shipbuilding base, with provisions aimed at strengthening ties with allied shipbuilding nations. Whether that bill, or something like it, would ultimately authorize new construction contracts to go to a South Korean yard is, as of this reporting, still unsettled. We're not going to tell you it's a done deal, because the sourcing doesn't support that. What's genuinely surprising here isn't that Washington is considering foreign help. It's how far the groundwork had already quietly advanced before this White House signal made headlines. A repair contract here, a shipyard acquisition there, a $150 billion investment framework signed months earlier. By the time a report like this surfaces, the pieces have often already been moving for a while. Let's talk about why the Navy's shipbuilding backlog got this bad in the first place, because that context matters for judging whether foreign capacity is a reasonable answer or a risky one. American shipyards have faced a shrinking skilled workforce. Welders, pipe fitters, and electricians are retiring faster than new workers are trained to replace them. Supply chains for specialized components, like submarine reactor parts and advanced sensor systems, have been strained since the pandemic disrupted manufacturing broadly. And decades of consolidation left the U.S., with a small number of yards capable of building the Navy's most complex vessels, so any single yard's problems ripple through the entire fleet's delivery schedule. The Navy and outside analysts, including the Congressional Research Service, have documented these pressures in public reports for years. This isn't a new discovery. It's a known structural weakness that this policy conversation is trying, in one way, to work around. Here's a take that will probably draw some pushback, and we'll say it plainly. Relying on any foreign yard, even one belonging to a close treaty ally like South Korea, to build American warships is a tacit admission that the U.S. shipbuilding industrial base has fallen short of what the Navy needs. No single policy announcement fixes that overnight. Investment funds and repair waivers are real steps, but they're incremental. If new construction authority for foreign yards is genuinely on the table, it would mean Washington acknowledging that decades of underinvestment in domestic shipyards can't be reversed fast enough through domestic effort alone. That's not a knock on South Korea, whose shipbuilders have earned their reputation through decades of scaled, disciplined commercial production. It's a statement about what the option being floated says about the state of American shipbuilding. So we'll put the question to you directly. Does turning to an allied nation's shipyards make the U.S. Navy fleet stronger and faster to build, or should every U.S. Navy warship be built on American soil, no matter how far behind schedule the yards fall? There isn't an obviously correct answer here, and reasonable people who follow naval policy disagree on it. The investment money has been pledged. The repair waiver has already been used once. On paper, the pathway toward deeper Korean involvement looks like it's already been cleared. In practice, the single biggest legal barrier, new construction authority for a foreign yard, still stands untouched, waiting on Congress. Let's look at what a Korean-built U.S. Navy ship would even plausibly look like, sticking only to what's been reported and what's structurally possible, not speculation about specific hulls. Analysts covering this story, including outlets like Naval News and USNI News, have generally framed the most realistic near-term possibility as support vessels or auxiliary ships, the kind of dry cargo, replenishment, or logistics vessels that carry fewer of the classified systems and specialized combat requirements built into a destroyer or submarine. Those are the categories where foreign yards, including Hanwha's, have already shown they can be trusted with U.S. Navy work through the Wally Schirra repair precedent. A frontline combatant, a destroyer, or a submarine carrying sensitive weapons and sensor integration remains, in the reporting we've reviewed, a much higher bar, both legally and in terms of what the Navy has signaled it's comfortable with. There's also a domestic political obstacle layered on top of the legal one. American shipyard, labor unions, and members of Congress from states with naval shipbuilding jobs, Virginia, Connecticut, Mississippi, and Maine among them, have historically pushed back hard against anything that looks like exporting Navy construction work overseas, even to an ally. Any formal move to open new construction contracts to South Korean yards would almost certainly face that political resistance before it ever reached a vote. How the White House and Congress navigate that pressure, if this proposal moves forward, is itself part of what remains unresolved. Here's what this tells us about the moment American shipbuilding is in right now. This isn't a story about one report or one signal from the White House. It's a symptom of a much longer-running tension between what the Navy says it needs and what the American industrial base has been able to deliver on schedule. Whether the answer ends up being more domestic investment, more foreign partnership, or some combination that expands slowly over the next decade, the pressure driving this conversation, submarine backlogs, delayed destroyers, an aging fleet facing a rising Chinese shipbuilding capacity that dwarfs America's own, isn't going away on its own. And that raises the question this video keeps circling back to. If the White House really is ready to let a foreign yard build for the U.S. Navy, what happens to the argument that America's warships must always be built at home? That tension sits underneath everything else in this story, and it's not resolved by the reporting we have so far. One detail that stuck with us researching this. The Jong-Ang Daily's framing treats this as news precisely because it would be such a departure from settled practice, not an evolution of something already normal, but a break with a rule most people assumed was untouchable. That framing tells you how seriously the shift is being taken, even before a single contract changes hands. Where does this actually stand right now, as of this reporting? Confirmed. The White House has signaled openness to allowing foreign shipyards, potentially including South Korean ones, to build for the U.S. Navy, according to the Korea Jong-Ang Daily. Confirmed. South Korea's Hanwha Ocean has already performed maintenance work on a U.S. Navy vessel under a legal waiver, and Hanwha owns the Philly shipyard. Confirmed. South Korea has committed to a large-scale investment framework tied to American shipbuilding, reached in 2025. Not yet confirmed. Any specific contract, ship class, or shipyard has been named as the first Navy vessel to be built in South Korea. Not yet confirmed whether Congress will authorize new construction work, as opposed to repair and investment, to go to a foreign yard at all. Still developing. The exact timeline for any formal policy change, and how organized political opposition from U.S. shipbuilding states will shape the outcome. There's more nuance here than fits in one video, particularly around exactly what the Ships for America Act would and wouldn't authorize. If you want a deeper breakdown of that legislation specifically, tell us in the comments and we'll consider it for a follow-up. So where does that leave the story? A White House signal, not a signed law. A repair precedent, not a construction contract. A $150 billion investment framework already in motion. And a South Korean shipbuilding industry more than capable of the work if the legal door eventually opens. Whether that door opens all the way to destroyers and submarines, not just support ships, is the open question at the center of this story, and it's one that will play out in Congress, not in a single news report. If you want to understand how the Navy got into this backlog in the first place, the Columbia-class submarine program is where that story really starts, and it's one we've covered in detail elsewhere on this channel.